A big win against the woke agenda, Americans don't understand freedom of the press, insane government fraud gets exposed, and woke TikTokers now hate Taylor Swift? All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of Brad vs. Everyone, my new daily series where I take on the craziest ideas from our politics and from across the internet, from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and if you're a returning viewer, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Now, without further ado, let's head down to Kansas, where the legislature just swung a big blow against the woke agenda. Essentially, there's been this problem where colleges, including public colleges, which are bound by the First Amendment, have started to require candidates for professor jobs or other positions to sign pledges affirming their commitment to DEI, which refers to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, those words might all sound great at face value, but the DEI movement actually holds some deeply radical positions on issues from race, to gender, to sex, to LGBT, and the very concept of equity itself is controversial, standing in stark opposition to traditional equality, like equality of opportunity, and instead insisting that any disparities are bad, and we need equity for people to reach the same outcomes. The equity approach leads to perversities like the system of affirmative action, where Asian American applicants to colleges were openly discriminated against because of their race, and other racial groups were given preferences, so much so that based on their race alone, they could get into colleges with hundreds of points lower on their test scores. So DEI, whether it's in the workplace or in higher education, is controversial. It's not something everyone is on board with. But across the country, colleges have started requiring professors to sign pledges affirming their commitment to DEI in order to be considered for different professorships or jobs or opportunities. It's essentially a political litmus test, and at public, taxpayer-funded colleges, that doesn't fly under the First Amendment. And it won't fly in Kansas at all anymore after the state legislature just passed a bill banning and prohibiting public colleges, not private colleges, but public colleges, from having these kinds of DEI pledges to limit employment opportunities. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression is celebrating the move, writing that Kansas takes a stand for intellectual freedom. Kansas enacts FIRE's Model Intellectual Freedom Protection Act, which prohibits mandatory statements on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all other political litmus tests. They report, in a victory for students, faculty, and applicants of Kansas public institutions of higher education, House Bill 2105 will become law on July 1st. The law will ensure that public colleges cannot use political litmus tests, regardless of the issue or the candidate's views, now or in the future as part of the hiring and review process. Over the last several years, FIRE has seen more and more colleges require applicants for admission or for faculty appointments, promotion, or tenure to disclose their views on DEI. DEI statements are the most common version of political litmus tests that we see on campuses today. Data shows that institutions often use a candidate's DEI statement as a de facto political litmus test. Say the wrong thing or decline to say anything at all, and an institution will reject a candidate before it even reviews the merits of their application. So under this new law, public colleges in Kansas won't be able to attach these kinds of ideological tests to opportunities. If you believe in free speech and academic freedom, that's a good thing. As FIRE previously wrote, the typical DEI statement is not concerned merely with a faculty member's relevant scholarship or the laudable goal of ensuring faculty refrain from discrimination or work toward the success of all of their students regardless of identity. Many policies invade faculty members' freedom of conscience, prying into their private beliefs on matters of public concern. They compel faculty to express or demonstrate commitment to the university's viewpoints or to conform their pedagogy, research, and/or service activities to specific ideological perspectives. Others are so vague they raise serious concerns that the lack of sufficient guardrails will allow improper viewpoint discrimination to creep into the evaluation process. Guys, we've covered crazy DEI stories here, and it's a lot more than just being accepting and tolerant and not discriminating against people because of their race. That's something we're all on board with. It is very much a left-wing social justice ideology and movement, and it is insane that anybody would be required to swear their fealty to it in order to be considered for an opportunity or a job at a government institution. I'm glad state lawmakers are cracking down on this process and taking a stand for academic freedom. The other thing the law does, which also makes a lot of sense to me, is mandate that all DEI trainings that the universities use in employment settings and so on are publicly available and posted publicly. This is good news because transparency can be the best disinfectant, and sometimes these DEI trainings include truly radical and insane stuff, or are openly racist towards white people, or all sorts of other harmful things that we don't really want funded with our tax dollars. At the very least, forcing them all to be made public will allow an accountability and some checks and balances as people and reporters are able to highlight them so people actually know what their dollars are being funneled into. That's much better than having it all hiding behind closed doors and only finding out about it if it gets leaked or if some journalists do Freedom of Information Act requests. All in all, this is a big win for anybody who's concerned about the excesses of woke extremism on college campuses, but also throughout American life. Other states can and should look to Kansas and to FIRE's model legislation as a guide for how they can combat this extreme woke movement while still not infringing on anybody's rights or engaging in censorship in any way. After all, colleges are still free to have institutional DEI policies, support DEI, hold symposiums, do whatever they like. They just simply can't compel individuals to affirm their fealty to their ideas. That's just a basic protection for free speech. But what do you think? Have you ever been asked to swear a DEI fealty pledge in order to apply for a job? Or have you ever been put through a wacky DEI presentation at work? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button if you found this story interesting. Up next, Americans really don't understand the First Amendment or the freedom of the press. At least, that's really the only conclusion we can draw from new survey data out of Pew Research. At first glance, the findings are really optimistic, with a broad majority of Americans saying they value the freedom of the press. As the Pew poll reports, most Americans say press freedom is important to society, with 73% saying it's extremely or very important, and 18% saying it's somewhat important. Only 8% said it was only a little important or not at all. And there weren't big partisan differences in this data, so at first glance, it really does seem like there is huge, broad support in America for freedom of the press. That's great news, right? Like cause for celebration. Yeah, not so fast. As JD Tusil pointed out in a great article for Reason, when you look into the specifics of the polling, a much murkier picture emerges. When Pew asked Americans how they feel about freedom of press versus controlling misinformation and cracking down on false info, which is often how censorship debates are framed in our modern context, the results were much more concerning. Only 46% of US adults said that freedom of the press should always be protected, even if it means false info could be published. Meanwhile, 51% said the publication of false info should always be prevented, even if it means freedom of the press could be limited. Republicans were somewhat more likely to support freedom of the press than Democrats, and Democrats were somewhat more likely to support suppressing false info as a priority over freedom of the press. This is really concerning, y'all. I can understand the feeling here, right? We're all sick of fake news. We're all sick of media bullshit and bias and falsehoods and being misled. Heck, I've had some of the most false and horrific things said about me in news articles, and there's nothing I can do about it. Under our current standards, it's all just freedom of the press. And that really can suck sometimes. But guys, that is the price of freedom. If you don't have a press that is allowed to publish information that some people consider false, you don't have a free press. Now, obviously, we have some narrow exceptions for things like defamation, but that's when they know information is false and they publish it anyway, or they publish it with just total disregard for truth and accuracy. Just generally, allowing newspapers to be able to get things wrong sometimes is an important part of freedom of the press. And the idea that the government could ever police that effectively or crack down upon it is not just dystopian, but deeply naive. There are some things that everybody knows what's true and what's false. The sky is blue. The earth is round. Yes, flat earthers out there, you're not right. But But especially when it comes to the complex debates that still divide society, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of murky questions and claims that people aren't quite sure what's true and what's false. There is no objective authority on truth versus false that we could turn to decide what's true and what's false. Certainly not the government. First of all, the government routinely, regularly, knowingly lies to the public. As Reason pointed out, a treasure trove of government documents obtained by the Washington Post revealed that senior U.S. officials failed to tell the truth about the war in Afghanistan throughout the 18-year campaign, making rosy pronouncements they knew to be false and hiding unmistakable evidence the war had become unwinnable. So, if we had actually had the government policing falsehoods and truth like apparently a majority of people want, then all the newspapers that were reporting critical things or bad news for the US about how the war was going, they would have been shut down or censored or scared into not even publishing the thing in the first place. Because the officials in the government said it wasn't the truth. Turns out they were lying. You guys, are you starting to see the problem here? Much of what a free press has to do is be adversarial to the powers that be, especially the government. But if you give the government the ability to decide truth and false and then punish people who say false things or report false things, that totally neuters the ability of that press to hold that government accountable. Also, even when they're not being dishonest, government officials and experts still get things wrong all the time. They're not infallible, they're not omniscient. Even though Dr. Fauci said it, he is not science embodied. They're human beings who make mistakes. We heard them say that the COVID lab leak theory was just a conspiracy theory. Now, many government agencies believe it's the likely cause of the pandemic. They told us that masks didn't work, then that they did work. You get the picture? I honestly don't know how anybody who lived through the last few years can still somehow trust neutral government experts to decide what's true and what's false and then censor accordingly. When the media gets things wrong or misleads the public, it really, really sucks. But the freedom to make mistakes and the freedom to even publish false things is an indispensable part of the freedom of the press that keeps us all free in the long run. Americans who don't get this really need to reevaluate. But what do you guys think? How would you have answered this poll? Am I missing something? Do let me know in the comments. I want to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that like button. All right, up next, remember tax day? Remember how good it felt to hand over all that money to the government? Well, in news that shouldn't really surprise anyone, we've just learned that the government is wasting huge amounts of our tax money every single year. A new report from the Government Accountability Office shows that from 2018 to 2020, the federal government lost an estimated $233 billion to $521 billion annually to fraud. That is so much money. For context, at the low end, that comes out to about $1,600 per federal taxpayer. At the high end, it's as much as $3,600 per federal taxpayer every single year lost to fraud. And that's not even counting money that is spent on dumb things or wasted or just spent inefficiently. That's just the fraud. And unfortunately, no amount of good government reforms or any of that kind of thing is ever going to really solve this problem. Because government is inherently wasteful and inefficient and vulnerable to fraud. Because government officials are ultimately responsible for spending other people's money on other people. That's not exactly a recipe for frugality, now is it? The only way to stop so much of our money from being wasted is to reduce the scope of what the federal government is doing and really just have it focus on the most essential things, not on spending and regulating and being involved in almost every aspect of our lives. But what do you guys think? How does it make you feel to know that that much of our money is being lost to fraud every year? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button while you're at it. Up next, it's time for DELULU Epidemic, my segment where I react to people who are showing they're stupid. Today, this left-wing gay activist is trying to convince us that most gay men would date a biological female. Nicholas says, yes, I'm a gay man. Hell yes, I date a trans man, and I know I'm not alone in this. My dudes, don't let the TERFs, which means trans exclusionary feminists, let you think they're the majority. They aren't and never will be. Does he not know what the word gay means? A gay man is a biological male who is romantically and sexually attracted only to other biological males. Regardless of how they identify, if you're attracted to or in love with somebody who is ultimately their sex is biologically female, that's not what gay is. There's nothing wrong with that, to be clear. Love whoever you want. Live your best life. But that's somewhere on the bisexual spectrum. Maybe it's somewhere on something they might call queer nowadays. But it's not the same thing as being gay. It's just not. And the claim that most gay men would date a biological female is just objectively untrue. We don't have to speculate about this or consult some random Twitter dudes to hot take on it. We have survey data. A 2018 survey found that more than 85% of gay men said the opposite, said they would not date a trans man. So babe, facts don't care about your feelings. And you can virtue signal as much as you want, but you don't get to make up words and make up definitions. The dictionary is not a choose-your-own-adventure book. And to the woke gays on Twitter, your DELULU is showing. Alright, up next, it's time for Brad vs. TikTok, my segment where I react to the craziest and cringiest ideas going viral on the Clock app. Today, apparently woke TikTokers now hate Taylor Swift? Buckle up and get ready to lose some brain cells with me. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And now, let's see what this first fine young individual had to say about the legendary pop artist Taylor Swift.
I feel like whenever it comes to Taylor Swift, I'm just like upset. I'm upset because it's just white mediocrity in extremes. Like people keep gassing her up, and so now she's got an ego conflated with it. And it's just like, not only are you objectively not a good artist, like artistically, vocally, like culturally, she just has not made a musical impact that I can see, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not. I'm just kidding. But along with that, she's just dated men that directly harm the communities I'm a part of. She's a climate terrorist. She's a billionaire, and she's also just white, skinny, blonde. Period.
So I just learned a new woke buzzword. White mediocrity. Pretty sure a person can just be mediocre, regardless of their race, but okay. Look, you don't have to like Taylor Swift, but she's not everybody's cup of tea. But the idea that she is mediocre is kind of absurd. I mean, just as an objective fact, she's now financially bigger than the Beatles. She's become a billionaire as a musician, which not every musician does. That takes real savvy and entrepreneurialism and real strategic thinking and long-term planning. I just don't get how anyone can look at her and think that she's mediocre. And it honestly sounds like this chick is just discriminating against her and hating on her because she's white and blonde and thin. Like, switch the races there, repeat that back to me, and you'll realize how racist and intolerant that sounds. Also, the idea that she's dated men who've done harm to your community is just silly. How? When? Where? Let me know. And the climate terrorist thing, oh my god, that sent me. Like, what? I mean, I do think that it's kind of hypocritical when celebrities say they care about climate change, but then there are jet setting all over the world in their private jets. But the idea that it makes her a terrorist, come on, that's ridiculous. I'm sure her plane's emissions are not even a blip in the radar of what's happening worldwide. And also, I have some sympathy in that, like, what is she supposed to do? Go and fly and coach around the world with her whole tour and everyone she needs to bring with her? And how would that possibly be safe? What the chaos, the disorder that would cause? I mean, I'm not sure for her it's a super viable alternative to go another way. Regardless, even emitting carbon doesn't make somebody a terrorist, and that is a really ridiculous, hyperbolic statement from this individual. But of course, the ridiculous statements didn't stop there.
I don't know if she's just not having that star status, along with the fact that I see through it. I see the mediocrity. I see the like... And also, just as a disclaimer, that wasn't hate to people who were skinny, blonde, or white. It was more so in relation to like her harm on marginalized communities attached to those privileges and associations. Anyways, I don't even know what artist I would compare her to. Like, there's no one comparable. There's no one who's been that mediocre with that level of success. So it's just like, what do you even do? Like she's giving TikToker artists realness. And that's the truth of the matter. In my perspective, in my opinion, I already feel like the Swifties are going to harass me and she's not going to do anything because she doesn't even care about what she's like. That's the other kicker. Like, Swifties suck. And I feel like your fandom is representative of who you are. So it's just like, I don't know.
Yeah, so the last part is really dumb to me. So Taylor Swift, the billionaire and global superstar, is supposed to tell her fans not to harass somebody on TikTok whose video got a couple 100,000 views or whatever. No, babe, you're not even on her radar. And regardless, I don't think you can hold the most extra part of a fan base. When you have millions and millions and millions of fans, you're going to have a small minority or a fringe that is crazy or over the top or aggressive or whatever. I don't know if you can really hold that against somebody, because anytime you have millions of people involved in something, there's going to be some bad eggs. It honestly just seems like this person is motivated by some kind of racial animus against Taylor Swift. Though she did say she liked Demi Lovato, another part of the video I didn't play, so maybe that's not it, but I don't understand. Maybe it's just wanting to hate on the thing that everybody likes and be edgy, but wherever this person's coming from, nothing they're saying makes any sense or has any relationship to reality. But also, some of these TikTokers just seem to hate Taylor Swift because she's wealthy, because she's successful, and because they're just consumed by socialist class warfare or something.
We have got to stop with this. We have got to stop with like this weird, morally driven fan project of trying to argue that Taylor Swift became a billionaire, the first billionaire, by selling only her music alone. That's just like so not true, and I want to go through that really quickly. Number one, let's get aligned on the fact that billionaires should not exist.
No, actually, we're not aligned on that, because I actually think it's good when people, as long as they're not, defrauding people or scamming people or colluding with the government to get massive subsidies or corporate welfare, I think it's good if people create tremendous value for the world and are allowed to reap the benefits from it, especially because some studies estimate that even the biggest, wealthiest innovators only get personally about 2% of the wealth that they create for society. So far we're not aligned, and something tells me we're only going to get less aligned as we go along.
In a functional capitalist economy, in any functional economy, we would not be celebrating any billionaire. There is no scenario in which someone becomes a billionaire by being an artist. You become a billionaire by pushing product at a global scale and by taking advantage of a series of chains of exploitation through human labor. That is how you become a billionaire. Full stop. Number two, I understand what people are saying about the fact that Taylor Swift doesn't leverage her namesake to have certain brand deals that she could. And I have noticed that, and I do appreciate it. I think that it is a brand strategy, but I prefer that brand strategy. Like, I do think it helps you kind of stay connected with her music, but that's not accidental. And that doesn't mean that she doesn't partner with brands. Taylor Swift has like a very white collar approach to brand partnerships. Remember her Capital One partnership, which is still ongoing? Remember how you had to sign up for a credit card to get access to the Eras Tour ticket presale? When you think about the implications of that she is partnering with major credit card companies in order to give people access to her tour dates, that is a pretty major partnership with pretty major implications for her fans. And when you think about the option was to get into that presale or to buy tickets for thousands of dollars, it's a pretty huge incentive for someone to sign up for a credit card and then end up spending money and paying interest on credit card fees.
So there's nothing wrong with partnering with brands, and there's nothing even wrong with partnering with a credit card company. She encouraged her fans to sign up for credit cards, sure, which is actually something they should be doing for their own financial best interests, to build credit, to maximize on points. Just using debit cards for all your expenses or whatever isn't even smart financially. And just because they sign up for a credit card doesn't mean they're going to have to pay any interest or any credit card fees or anything like that. If they responsibly use the credit card, they'll never have to pay huge interest amounts, and that will never accumulate. It's like 100% a question of, like anything, what you do with it. But no, she's making money and working with a corporation, so that must be evil in these people's worldview.
Number two, Target. Any fan of Taylor Swift knows that there has been a Target deal for decades now. Like, you go and you get the Target Deluxe CD to get like that one extra special song, which basically means that you're paying like between $25 and $45 between the CD and the vinyl for one extra song that you can't get on streaming. That is not accidental. That is a product push.
More than one
that
song.
Is nurturing a relationship with your fans, whereby making them spend more money, you are also making them feel like they're a part of a group. That is very, very savvy marketing, and is very, very useful towards becoming a billionaire.
Again, I'm missing the part where anyone was hurt or victimized by her selling her music through Target and making extra songs available to fans who bought more expensive editions. Taylor Swift makes money from it and gets to create more music. These people get more access to songs they love and get a ton of enjoyment out of at a price they're willing to pay. No one's forcing them. This isn't food or water or something they have to buy. It's a fair trade. It's a win-win for everyone. But commies on TikTok don't like it, so it must must be bad. This lady goes on for many more minutes, but it all really does boil down to them just hating Taylor Swift because she's rich and successful. And you will just never catch me being on board with that kind of rank class envy and class warfare. We got one more woke TikTok hating on Taylor, and buckle up because it's possibly the most deranged one yet.
People are not misogynist because they don't like Taylor Swift. There's this girl going around the For You page talking about you could tell somebody's a misogynist based on the reason as to why they don't like Taylor Swift. And she was like, well, if people just say they don't like Taylor Swift because she's annoying or she writes too many love songs, they're probably a misogynist. Or maybe she's annoying. She might just be to some people. Like, it is what it is.
Yeah, I do agree with this part. Just because you don't like Taylor Swift doesn't mean you're a misogynist, doesn't mean you hate women. Although, I will say that sometimes men seem to really hate Taylor Swift for no real apparent reason, and it might just kind of be that a lot of women like it, so they think it's cool to not like it. But no, you're perfectly allowed to not like Taylor Swift, not enjoy her music, and that doesn't make you sexist. I agree so far.
But I can tell you why I don't like Taylor Swift. One, she represents something that she's not, right? She shows herself to be this feminist, this person who cares about women. You know, she's a girl's, but she's not. I've never seen this woman cater to a movement that did not directly impact her and her money.
So now you're just being ignorant. I mean, I wish she'd just stayed out of it all entirely, but Taylor Swift actually has waded into politics and fought for LGBT rights as she sees it, right? And weighed in on that issue. That doesn't affect her. She's not lesbian, she's not transgender, she's not gay. So you're just wrong.
Taylor Swift is a good example and representation as to where we have words like white feminism. We literally have to go and talk about stories of women of color facing different atrocities and problems than white women, because white women in feminism often neglect to talk about our side, and Taylor Swift is a great representation of that. Now, this is not necessarily Taylor's fault, but that one guy came on here on TikTok and said that she was bigger than Michael Jackson. That shit pissed me off, bro. And ever since then, I was like, you know what? I like Taylor Swift way less than I didn't like her before. And finally, my last reason for not liking Taylor Swift is because I'm envious of rich people. I don't even want their money. I just want rich people to be poor.
Oh? I mean, bonus points for honesty, I guess. But if you just hate rich people because they're well off and you just want them to be worse off, even though it has no impact on you, I mean, that's really kind of evil, kind of sick.
Like, be real. People are not misogynistic just because they don't like Taylor Swift. She's an infamous artist for a reason. A lot of people don't like her just because she's probably really annoying. And I'm telling you this as a person that has 4 of her songs in my Apple Music because they were bangers. But I also don't have respect for what she did in the Gaza situation either. She's clearly choosing her side and she's choosing to be a rich white woman, which is never the example of feminism in my eye, because I'm quite the opposite.
Again, like, it's giving anti-white racism, honestly. And just, shut up about the whole Gaza thing. Like, she doesn't know anything about it. She's not a geopolitical analyst. She's not a foreign policy expert. She's not somebody with familiarity on the tactics and ethics of war. Let her write pop songs. Just stop. All right, guys, I can't handle any more woke Taylor Swift haters without incurring permanent brain damage. And I'm coming at all this from not even a huge fan, just somebody who I've had some criticisms of her in the past, but I'm not a deranged hater. Anyway, what did you think of all this? Did you agree with any of it? Did you lose brain cells with me? Are these people DELULU? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button to reward me for my suffering, and maybe even consider subscribing and sticking around. All right, guys, before we go, I'll round out the show by reading a few of your comments you left on the last episode. First person says, I'd rather be a crazy dog person than a crazy dog killer. I completely agree. Another person said, I like that you cover radical liberals and Republicans, creates less bias, thank you. Yeah, I do push back on extreme people on the left and extreme people on the right, and I do want to give you guys kind of an independent, critical perspective. But I am still giving you my own opinion, so it's not unbiased, so do know that, but I will call out people on both sides that I disagree with. I'm not loyal to any tribe or any party, and I don't really give a shit about any of that, to be honest. Another person says, Gen Z is shocked to discover that when you don't make your political stance your entire identity, you can get along with people who disagree on some things. Yes. You can, and that's the approach that I personally take, but you're right, not a lot of people in my generation can do that these days. Another person says, I love how you defend the First Amendment for everyone. Yeah, it's not always easy, but you have to defend the First Amendment and free speech for everyone, or you actually are having it for no one. You gotta be all in on freedom, or you can't have it at all. All right, guys, we'll leave it there for your comments for today. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me on Brad vs. Everyone, my new daily series. Don't forget to subscribe and stick around if you enjoyed this, and maybe even hit that like button and do leave a comment. I will read them, and I will pick a couple to respond to on tomorrow's show. And with that, I'll talk to you all tomorrow.